Yes, I am going to unload. So I've got some big picture ones here, but then I sort of finish with a few specific ones. I sat there on Saturday night and I watched the Essendon Richmond game, and I couldn't help but feel in the last 5 minutes there was a sense of destiny. It looked like the Bombers were going to grind their way to that game. And then as they're coming down the race, I had this overwhelming feeling of, wow, that's a big win for them. It's a cathartic win. It cleanses the demons and the ills of the past, and it's the cleanest slate that I think Essendon have ever had in the last 10 years to be able to move on from the drug saga of 10 years ago. 2013 was when it sort of really started heating up, and they were taken out of the finals that year. But for right or wrong, I feel like it's taken that long for the club to get some clean air. And Brad Scott, in his post-match interview, reflected on something similar. Great words, perfect words delivered by a person untouched by the last 10 years, so he has the clean slate himself to lead and to drive this group. What happens is decisions are made in boardrooms, in coaches' rooms, and then eventually it pops out the service and we all see it down the track. Obviously, someone at Essendon had the courage to let go of the past because there was an element of their board that wanted to come back. They wanted to fight still. They wanted to fight for the character of James Hird, Mark Thompson, Egan, who coached for a bit, John Worsfold, Ben Rutten. They wanted to fight for those guys' character, and they wanted to fight the AFL and fight what they saw as the unfairness that came along with that last decade. But I think there was enough of the board that thought we've got to cut this loose. We can't be doing it out of resentment. We've got to be doing it looking forward and not back. So I think the courage of the board members and the decision makers in the last, say, 6 months, there might have been more of a groundswell over the last period of time. But to bring Brad Scott in with a clean slate, they just look like
well-drilled.
Like they look well-drilled. But the thing for me is their energy and their buy-in. Whether only Merritt and Heppel were players that were there back in that time. Zach Merritt was best on ground, and Heppel had moments that were really crucial to go and win that game. There's youth everywhere, and they're buying in, and they're giving pure, unadulterated effort. Durham, Menzies, Perkins, I love. I think that Redmond personifies the new Essendon, and I think their fans would look out in the field and see what he does. And he's just raw and he's aggressive. He's an ask for forgiveness type guy. He doesn't ask for permission. So I love what Essendon are building and what they have done in this short period in the first 10 rounds under Brad Scott. And I think you'd be waking up this morning after the game on Saturday night as an Essendon supporter feeling like not even feeling like there's anything that you're carrying with you. Because mud sticks, and I reckon whether for right or wrong mud sticks, they've been able to clear out the mud. They've got a clear canvas and they're going for it.
1300 736 736. Bombers fans, did it feel like a clean slate and the past is finally behind you? Let us know and join in the conversation with us this morning. Point two
is West Coast, and it's on the flip side. I love Adam Simpson. I think he's a great leader. He's a great coach. He's a great person, and his characteristics and attributes are what every football club needs to get behind to follow the right balance of carrot and stick. But they've gone 1 out of their first 10 rounds, 1 win out of the first 10 rounds this year, 2 out of 22 in last year, and lost the last 4 of 2021. So that's 3 wins from 36 games. He's got one of the longer contracts in the
25
in the
I
Cape
think
at the moment.
He's contracted to.
So he's got 4 or 5 year contract, and he did say that we've made this decision together that I'm here to go through the dip, go get the list right. But my question is, at what stage is trust lost irrevocably? Not just in the senior coach, but in leadership in general, in the direction that the club is going in. And potentially the only way you can stop that is to change the personnel. Not because they're not capable, but just because the circumstances around it, there's just too much mud. And I reckon Simo has so much to offer. My question is he in the right place to offer that?
Well, we asked this question last week. If he stays too long at West Coast, he won't be desirable for another club. If he chose to leave now and get out, he would absolutely have options elsewhere. That may seem like a selfish thing to do, but I think it would be beneficial for the club as well, because he's not going to last at West Coast. You just don't.
It's unlikely.
You just don't last that long with that record until the end of 2025. Now, you compare the strategy of West Coast to Hawthorn, and as much as the criticism has been about the list management at Hawthorn, you can actually see a clear plan and a clear method with the way that they're playing. That was damning yesterday. I mean,
Yep.
just the effort levels from the players, take out who was there, the effort levels couldn't have been worse, to the point where it looked like they have given up. And he's out of answers. I sit through his media conferences every week. He's out of answers. He's shocked at the situation the club finds itself in.
But we've got to understand, like, injuries are not the coach's purview. Like, sometimes it's bad luck. Sometimes
Sometimes it's list management. If you continually sign players who are always injured, well, I get that there are a lot of injuries and there's a lot on their injury list. But if it's Elliot Yeo, the guy gets injured every year.
Yeah.
If it's Nat Nui, it's the same. If it's Shuey, it's the same. These guys get injured every year. The list management strategy at the Eagles, the writing's been on the wall for 3 years. Everyone could see what they needed to do. They refused to do that arrogantly, I thought, and thought, no, we'll go again. They even went again this year.
I've hit a raw nerve here.
Well, I just think that the West Coast, I hear so many excuses out of that club. The writing was on the wall.
Well, that's all they've got at the moment
ago.
because there's no performance. And you can't go back 4 years ago and change what's happened. So you can only meet the situation as it is now and make the right decision. My focus was around a leader like Adam Simpson, who I reckon's got plenty to offer. Only he knows deep down whether this is the right thing for him. And therefore, if it's the right thing for the football club, it's got to be in that order first. Because if it's not the right thing for you, eventually that will bleed out and that will impact the people around you. Number 3 is Darcy Moore. I just can't ignore that performance. Like his game yesterday actually made me ponder what is the most important position on the field. What would you, if you were going out to build a squad from ground level, what's the first role that you put in? And his teammate Steele Sidebottom was pretty happy with his performance too. 17 intercept possessions, and it sort of does make you smile. Now, Steele doesn't take much. Doesn't take much for him to smile or to laugh because that's his default. He'll be in a contest and he'll freeze frame it and it'll look like he's grinning like a Cheshire cat. So that's not abnormal, but that was a freakish game. On and off Curnow, who was the number 1 rated player for Carlton, mind you. So you can argue sort of, how effective Darcy did his primary role, which was, arbitrarily to stop his direct opponent. But every time you looked down the ground vision, Darcy was in the perfect position.
How would, just on the side bottom comment,
yeah,
how would Carlton be feeling about that? He's almost smiling and laughing.
Well, he was apologetic about it at the same time.
It's not a criticism of Steele.
No.
But if you're a Carlton fan going, well, if the opposition player is amused by how often we kicked it to the one spot and how predictable we were, that's a reflection on us.
Well, I didn't reckon they were. It wasn't just that they were absolutely predictable. It was Darcy's work rate to slide across the ground, to put himself in the right. But you can overslide, you can underslide. He just kept putting himself in the right spot and knowing when to go and contest and compete and win a or have a contest against a Curnow or a Mackay.
So back to your point about the most important position.
Yes, I've got goal kicking midfield, and I'm going to throw this up because we could go for half an hour on this. Goal kicking midfielders like Martin De Goey, Petrarca. Strike forwards, Charlie Cameron, Jeremy Cameron, Charlie Curnow. Accumulators, Oliver Neil Pendlebury, or intercept defenders, Moore and May. I think there's an argument in the modern game today with the ability to put pressure on the ball, and that takes more than one. So you need to do that with 4 or 5 or 6 pressure players with speed that close down time and space before the opposition ball user is ready to use it. If you've got that, and you need that, and an intercept defender is basically your quarterback. He's the guy, a Darcy Moore or a Stephen May. I would argue that the modern game is nearly saying that those guys are more important than anything that happens in the front half. Now, the reason for this, if you can intercept, like the contest that Darcy Moore wins could well be goals for the opposition, but you don't know if they're going to be goals. So you can't say, that's a -1 goal. But you can say when someone kicks it through the goals that's a goal. Or there's a score involvement. You don't say that's a score negative for the opposition. Yeah. So it's harder to measure, but intrinsically, I feel that a player like that can win the ball in the air and on the ground and acts as a pivot for any rebounds that take place or any attacks that take place. If you're losing the ball through the stoppage, well, then you can redeem it more often than not. I think there's a fair argument
Is
there.
Is the intercept defender the most important role in football? Let us know. No love for the ruckman. Didn't even get their own category.
Oh, yeah, you could do that. They're probably coming in 5th at the moment. Zak Butters is my 4th, and I have to go to this. It's not the size of the dog in the fight; it's the size of the fight in the dog. And Zak Butters can you personify an animal? So he personifies that as much as any. And Kenny Hinckley was suitably impressed with his charge. And it's hard not to be impressed or proud. I don't know Zak Butters' pitch. I don't actually know his story, but this is what I'd glean. He's courageous, he's fast, he's skillful. He's never taken no for an answer. So he's got an abrasiveness and a bite off more than you can chew and chew like hell. He's worked hard and long for his chances and for his growth. Like it hasn't just come. It wouldn't have come easy to him. His body shape, his size in a game for big men would have made it difficult for him as he came through the ranks, and he's grown from it. So he's faced challenge and he's grown. He's adapted, he's overcome, and he's still doing it. So when you have that attitude and you realise that you can succeed and you can impose yourself, his decision making is ability to see half a step to take that ball and be really clean, watch the ball all the way into his hands, and yet swivel, find that next guy, and move the ball on quickly and promptly and efficiently. Is first class. I'm really looking forward to seeing what he can do in the next 3 or 4 years.
I think you summed it up well, Bucks. You did a terrific piece with AFL.com maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. He had that really significant knee injury with nerve damage, and he said went into the operation knowing that if this didn't work, the career was on the line, but I was going to find a way. I was going to find a way to get back to my best. So it's an inspirational story in a way, and it has had some challenges in his family life, which he's spoken publicly about as well.
And that's awesome. And the bloke goes back to the fight as if he's got 100 kilos and he's got padding on him.
That's
like
the only
a
concern
guy.
is he's too brave for his own good at times, and that has cost him.
You know what? You live by the sword, you die by the sword, and we're going to get the very best out of him, and he's not going to die wondering ever. I'm really I love seeing individuals, people in life, not just on the footy field, that make the most of their challenges, that actually turn their trauma into opportunity. And I feel that he's been there. Last one for me is North Melbourne and their youth. And the focus out of that game for me isn't the interchange infringement. It's actually the way that the young players at North actually went about it. So Jai Simpkins, the captain, just turned 25, had 28 and 2. Sheasel was moved up in the midfield. Now, was that a Rats thing or was that happening regardless? But that's interesting in itself, 25 and 2 and taking your better ball users closer to goal. Now, you've got to win. You've still got to win the contest to go forward. Wardlaw, there's been enough spoken about him, 9 tackles, 6 clearances, and just got poleaxed early, but then he got up and he got going, and you wouldn't have known any different. In fact, it nearly like it energised him even further to keep going. Eddie Ford, 21 and a goal in front of the ball. Bailey Scott, who's been around for a while, still only 22, 33 and a goal. I love Miller Bergman. I love Blake Dury. They bring energy and effort. They don't have to get high touches, but they have a real crack. Paul Curtis, he didn't have a lot of touches, but he's got some class. Phillips and Powell. I think that if I'm a North Melbourne supporter, I don't need to win games of footy. You just need to see that effort and that attitude. And they were in that game for a long time, and everyone was expecting Sydney to rebound and to come back. So there's questions that got to be asked about Sydney, and we'll get to that later in the program. But I just thought that was a great response from North. And off the back of your article about what they'd be thinking, if they get that for 3/4 of their games for the rest of the year, that sort of effort, that sort of energy from the young blokes, they'll wed themselves to each other.
Let's get straight into it. So I just want to put this on the radar. Treat this as a temperature check. We're 10 weeks into the season, and before we know it, it'll be finals. There's one coach in his contract year in the AFL this year. That's quite unusual across the last decade. Normally, there's none. Sometimes there's one. I know Bucks, you were, Leon Cameron was, but the fact Ken Hinckley's where he's at now as the only one is quite unusual. Most coaches get re-signed or sacked before their last season because clubs don't want the pressure of going into the last year with a coach potentially out of contract. So with that in mind, there's 8 coaches who are out of contract at the end of 2024. How many of these 8 will remain in their jobs for 2024 and unsigned, or how many won't make it? So surely, I break it into 4 groups, these 8. So McRae and Goodwin are surely penning new deals in the next few months.
Big deals.
Nix and Longmuir are in very similar positions, both 5 and 5, both with similar win-loss ratios across their almost 70 games, and probably go into next year unsigned at this point. There's still a little bit to play out this year. Chris Scott and Damien Hardwick, I think it's probably essentially up to them what they want to do. And there's a bit of uncertainty around that for various reasons. And then there's Michael Voss and Stuart Dew, who I think are probably the most vulnerable of the 8. And with Gold Coast and Carlton probably not meeting expectations as much as they'd like so far this year. We know with this, one domino can fall and it opens up the entire landscape. We saw it last year. We've seen it before. So how do you see this playing out? There's obviously wild cards as well with Adam Simpson. Ken Hinckley is in his last year this year. How do you see it playing out with those 8 end of next year?
And what does a contract mean?
Well, it
Is
depends
the
on the
old-
club.
A lot less than it used to.
Exactly right.
With the payout.
So
It depends on the club.
it doesn't essentially matter if they're contracted or not, particularly the financial clubs who just go, okay, we're going to cop our bullets here and we're going to pay whatever the remaining is of the contract. We saw it with Brett Ratten. He signed a 2-year deal and months later he was gone.
But it matters for Adam Simpson, for example. I know West Coast have got
Well,
a lot of
they
money.
can afford to, if they don't think he is the right person and the pressure
Or that Adam
continues to
feels
build,
that he
or
doesn't
Adam,
want to stay.
But Adam would be unlikely to do that because he wouldn't then receive, if it was his choice to leave.
This was one point that I didn't get to. He would know in his gut whether he thinks he's got it in him. He wouldn't want to step out on the club if he felt that they needed him. He would want to see that through. So that's why the conversations, say with the Trevor Nisbet as a CEO or the football manager, Craig Vozzo, those conversations, those hard conversations that you think coaches are having with players, and they are all the time around their performance. They need to be they need to be had, and there needs to be some decisions from it, and that might be status quo.
I'd be staggered if Adam Simpson is still there by the end of this season. I would.
But they can't. Well, if they sack him, that's probably a $2 million payout
Have you seen how much money the West Coast?
6 months.
There are clauses
for West Coast.
Yeah.
For West Coast being a club that's not supported by the AFL. So
Do West Coast have the fail safe of a 6-month extermination clause?
I'm not sure exactly what's in his contract, but what I do know is that there's AFL clubs that are supported by the AFL, like Gold Coast, St Kilda, and there's clubs that are completely independent, and West Coast is one of the completely independent ones.
Well, that's just bizarre that there'd be different regulations for people in the same position. That is a fact. So
there are.
One thing that I would say about that is that at the AFL, we are probably the least ruthless competition around the world on coaches.
Yep.
And for that to have snuck in, that makes it more likely to be ruthless around performance. But we are also, the AFL coaches are also part development coaches and part performance coaches, because we've got a list that it could be at different phases of contention. The other one is, how can coaches be imposed this out clause, and players, if players have 5 or 6 year deals, there should be a 1 year out clause for the clubs if they feel like they've got it wrong there. Why is it right for the coaches and not for the players?
I've said this before. I cannot believe that the Coaches Association have allowed this clause to come in, and this goes for assistant coaches as well. They've got the same thing. Where there's no security at all. Contract is a contract. Well, what's with a 6-month payout clause? But to answer the Adam Simpson question, well, Hawthorn did it to a lesser extent with Alistair Clarkson. They paid him $900,000 to go and travel overseas.
Yeah.
They made a hard call on that. That's the way it's shaping up. The fascination is around Ken Hinckley.
Yes.
For Port Adelaide. Like, are they going to let this guy walk? If they let him walk, which I feel like they are going to do, that would be, if you ask me right now, will Ken Hinckley be coaching Port Adelaide next year? I will say no. I feel like they're going to go in a different direction.
Even if they make a prelim.
If they make a prelim. But it's one of the biggest calls in club history, because you've got a very good coach, and we've seen him coaching at the top of his game. The players love him. They are all in. And you're going to go, okay, we're going to go with a fresh set of eyes. You'd want to make sure the fresh set of eyes is good. We'll go through all the 9 teams, ask each other who the results are.
Well, I'm going to get you to answer this one first, because you thought Melbourne were a Monty for this. So Port Adelaide and Melbourne's result, who does that say more about? Or who does it speaks volumes of?
It speaks volumes of Port Adelaide, I think it speaks to Port Adelaide's desire, their toughness, their pressure, but also their method. And I thought it was one of the better wins of Ken Hinckley's home and away coaching career, when you've got no Dixon, no Marshall, no Georgiades, no Rioli in the injuries that they've had. And they are undersized. They're an undersized defence, but they keep coming up with a way to win. They've beaten Brisbane, they've beaten Western Bulldogs, they've beaten Melbourne. A number of those wins have come in close games, and there is something intangible about this group. I don't think they're in the top 4 conversation. I don't. I think there's, for personnel reasons, there's issues in the ruck that they've got as well, and I think that will come back to get them. Their draw is difficult, but right now, speaking volumes about the way that Ken Hinkley's coaching and the way the players are buying in.
Agreed.
North and Sydney, who does it speak volumes about?
Sydney for me, there's real concerns there. 4 wins out of the 10, and to just, even though they've won, it's the way that the win came about, or the way that the 4-quarter performance unravelled was actually a black mark on Sydney again. Now, that's not saying North, I thought, showed great pluck, but Sydney are a side that were one of the form sides of the competition. Going in the grand final last year, got smacked. The questions all off-season has been how are they going to respond. They've lost to Collingwood a couple of weeks back, which was meritorious in some ways, but they've been flogged by the Cats. They got pipped by the Giants, and then Fremantle got the better of them up at the SCG. So they're really struggling to impose their game style on the opposition, and it's largely around contest and work rate. And we just have not seen that against any team in the last 5 or 6 weeks.
Their midfield, Sydney.
Yeah, well, it's
slaughtered.
But their young players pick up a lot of touches. I mean, Gordon's having an exceptional year. Errol is having an exceptional year. But like Parker's sort of feels like he's doing it all on his own. Warner, we know we said these guys. It's tickled your fancy, hasn't it?
Bashed in the midfield, minus 20, I think it was in clearance.
But and they've had a makeshift ruckman there for a little while, and Hickey's been back, but it hasn't really changed. So it's a real watch on Sydney. They've got some work to do, and they've got to be doing it really quick. The Dogs or the Crows?
The Dogs. It speaks volumes of them. They're in the premiership conversation. They're in the window, and it's exactly where I saw them at the start of the year. They do not want for anything with this group of players. They had nearly 100 more possessions than Adelaide. They had 30 scoring shots to 15. What about this for a stat? Adelaide had 72 hitouts to 35. That's what happened there. Tim English is in the ruck. So I was down.
There was a bit of a tag team with O'Brien and Himmelberg.
Willora. Plying my trade. But the Western Bulldogs need to start being spoken about with Collingwood, with Brisbane, with Port, with Melbourne, with Geelong as a team that can realistically win this premiership.
Well, they won contested ball by 35, and that is their DNA. And we are seeing it come to fruition more and more. And they've got the run off the back. Johannesson out is going to hurt them. But they've probably got enough momentum to cover that as they go along.
It is Fremantle and Geelong. We touched on the Cats a little bit, but who does it speak volumes of? I'm going to go to Freo. I just feel like that they've got their mojo back a little bit. I think Josh Tracy in front of the ball, underrated competitor. I see him in the mould of a Brodie Myercheck. I think he's just and maybe a bit of Tim Membry, a hard-working sort of mid-sized key forward who is going to compete. I didn't think we'd be speaking of Josh Tracy as an important player. Well, he's a 20-year-old. He's still coming along. He's a young man who's big and combative and has a dip. And really, when you look at Freo's profile, that's what they were looking for, and that's what they were missing out on. Jackson's come to hand a little bit. Taberner was injured, and it was quite obviously injured, and they made the hard decision to turn him out rather than just go along with him at 2/3 fitness. But they had to wait because Tracy's been coming for a while. Amos is a genuine target and works really hard. And when their small forwards are up and going, I love them. Switkowski, Frederick, and Schultz has been consistent throughout the whole year. So they just seem to have their mojo about them at the moment. And the next couple of weeks into the bye will be really interesting. They play Melbourne at the MCG. Last time they played Melbourne at the MCG, they kicked 12 goals to 2 in the second half and won that game. It was Melbourne's first loss of last year. So, they're up and about. It'll be interesting to see if they can continue to pull their game together. We just spoke to Lachie Neale, Brisbane and Gold Coast up at the Q Clash. Yeah, so let's go with Gold Coast. It's another wasted season, really, isn't it? They're admirable, and they're in games, and you think, here they come, but in the end, it's another game that they lose against good opposition by a big margin, and after 10 games, they've won 4. And it's very similar story for Gold Coast, and the year will play out exactly like the last year played out and the year prior to that, and they're just not ready to make the jump yet. Did love Bailey Humphrey's game, though. Yeah, there's another one. Big body midfielder who's a bit rough around the edges with some of the skill level stuff, but 26 he had, a lot of the footy, career best game for him, and they need some more midfield talent to help Anderson and Rao and Took Miller when he plays. Some of the describing words: horrible, diabolical, frustrating, horrendous. Damien Hardwick, speaking about that close loss at the death in the Dreamtime game against the Bombers. You've touched on Essendon and what it meant for them.
Yeah, and I think that they're the ones that it speaks more about, speaks volumes of. I just thought that was a significant breakthrough moment for them, not just for their season and not just for this young group, but for the club across. And they've lost their last 5 games, and it's not as if they've performed poorly. I think they've shown great energy, great effort. They play with pluck. They play with aggression. I like what they have put on, regardless of win-loss. I just like what they've brought forward and what they're buying into together as a unit. As I said earlier today, out of 7, I love Mason Redmond. I think he personifies the group and the new attitude that we're seeing sort of come through. I love Durham. He's a beauty, and like. You can already see, like he does some exceptional things, but he built his performances and built his, I suppose his brand already is on desperate acts and pressure acts and work rate in defence and contest, which is a great start, and the offense stuff will come and bleed off the back of that.
Before we get to the next one, Brooks Koepka has won the PGA Championship. Your man.
So that's three times he's won this particular event, the PGA, over the last 8 years, I think, and he's had one other or two other top 10 finishes. So he loves this event in particular. He's been a winner for a long time, and he'd be enjoying being back in the majors winner circuit. All right, I've got Hawthorn and West Coast. Who does it speak volumes about?
Yeah, so as I said, Coxie and I sat through that yesterday, and Coxie did a magnificent job maintaining the energy. So I'm surprised you haven't bought your own highlights this morning, which is a first for you, that he hasn't bought his own calls and some highlights. I'm sure before 9 o'clock we'll get to that. But it says more about West Coast and the situation that they find themselves in. I don't see a way out. And there's been some I played in a ordinary side from 2011 to 2012. You win 3 and 5 games. You think, how are we going to get ourselves out of this? One draft can change the whole course of your club, right? So,
with the skill that you bring in or the attitude that you bring in?
Both, but you need
the second one's more important.
Yeah, the attitude's important. You need the talent. So I'm looking at what North Melbourne have got, and can one draft with Sheasel and Wardlaw change where they're going as a club? I say yes. The same at Port. Like Rosie and Butters changed the whole course of it, and of course it's not just 2 players. You add in and around the mix of that. So they're going to get the number 1 pick. They'll get Harley Reid. Some talk that they may trade that pick to try and get a suite of picks. Maybe that is worth doing with the lack of draft picks that they've had. But they got some big decisions that they need to make, West Coast, and I can't remember a club being in as poor a position as what they are. Carlton got done again by the Red Hot Pies yesterday, Bucks.
Yeah, I'll say Collingwood, and it is saying something given that they've been in the type of form that they have. But I just thought their burst, in the middle of the first quarter was enough. Nearly 4 goals without Carlton touching the ball. So the centre bounce work, their play forward of the ball, it was centre bounce clearance and either goal, or centre bounce clearance and then forward stoppage, win that and kick a goal. So there was, we were a straight Scott Pendlebury kick from 4 goals, without Carlton touching the ball.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't really matter what level the opposition are at. That's hard to do. That shows that a real synergy, a real drive, a connection piece, and the ability to score heavily when you need to. And Collingwood put Carlton to sleep, pretty much by early in the second quarter, and then the game just petered after that. They were able just to idle and go through and win the game, which is saying something against a side that has, with Carlton, who has the top end that they have. But Collingwood were exceptional. GWS and St Kilda rounded the round out.
I'm going to say the Saints, I really liked, and I said this to Kingy on Friday, that the Mulligan grab with Ross, I thought he picked his timing right on when to play that. It was a poor performance against Adelaide, but they'd been up for a long time, and they bounced back strongly. They're not in the top 6 teams in the competition, Saints, but if they make the finals, that'll be a significant achievement. Prior to the start of the year, they said we don't have enough A-grade talent. They're finding some A-grade talent. Like Sinclair is A-grade talent.
He's been A-grade for a while.
It has been. Wanganeen Malira is beginning to be A-grade talent. Owens is A-grade talent. He got knocked out yesterday, and the difference that Max King makes. You couldn't have asked for a better return from Max King. His performance yesterday was as good as we've seen from him, like fresh off a shoulder that popped out in his first game back. So he kicked 4. I reckon what he has done is worked really hard on his goal kicking technique while he has been out, and used that opportunity to do that. His technique looked really
You're doing that off the back of one game.
strong yesterday. Well, your technique you can see.
Yeah. Has it changed, do you think?
Yeah, I think the momentum in his goal kicking yesterday, we hadn't seen that. Now, if he fixes that up, because that's been the only real blemish on his game.
The goal kicking is a lot of mentality,
Look
though,
out,
and he obviously
yeah.
came in with a really positive
But
mentality.
I thought his technique right from the start, it looked to me like he'd spent a lot of time on it. That's just an outside observation. I don't know. But 8 marks, his movement was great, and the difference that he makes is significant. So while, the Saints will be up against it to make the 8, I think they will from this position, and they should. I thought it said more about them.
Yeah, I think they were brilliant, and they just keep coming too. So we've got the chance to assess and to see the runs of teams, whether it's wins or losses, and it's not fatal at this time of year. But if you've got a couple of losses in a row, like Sydney, Geelong, they need to turn it around.
Yep.
And if you haven't wins like Fremantle, they need to take advantage of this whilst they're on this run. Essendon need to keep the momentum of last weekend. They want to go again as well. So always fascinating to see what happens round around.
Speaks